All right. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you all. And tonight we're going to be discussing the Highmark Medical Center signage and our Issaquah strategic plan. So we'll go through the Highmark Medical Center signage first, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll probably move down and sit around the table for a little more intimate or informal discussion with the commissioners. And but we have some business to attend to. We have some minutes from April 4th that I would ask for recommendations on approval, or if you have corrections.
Mr. Chair, I recommend approval of the minutes as written for the April 4th meeting.
Thank you. The notes have been recommended for approval and seconded. Any comments or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Great job on the notes, by the way. Excellent job. You're amazing, as always. So, let's go.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Christopher Wright, and I'm with the city's Development Services Department. And as Richard mentioned, what I'm presenting to you this evening is it's an administrative adjustment of standards application for the Highmark Medical Building signage. And this vicinity map shows there in blue where the building is located. It has, SR 900 is immediately to the east. About a block north is Gilman Boulevard. And then it has Mall Street to the north and Maple Street to the south. And the address is 1740.
I'm sorry, Christopher? Mm-hmm. Mind if I make a disclosure?
Sure, that's right. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yep.
The firm that I work for, we manage an investment fund that owns the Maple Street office building, which is a few blocks from this building. It's a regular office building, not a medical dental office building. We're 100% occupied, so this, I don't believe, has any impact on our fund or our building or myself, and I feel that I can not be influenced by that, but wanted to state that in case anybody has a concern about that.
Right, and if any members of the applicant team wish to ask Mr. Morgan to step down, he certainly can.
We're good.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So this is a site plan that shows kind of how the site is oriented. Again, this is at the bottom of the page would be SR 900 with kind of the boardwalk that goes along the front. And then here's the building itself. And the signs that we're talking about are basically here and here. And in 2009, the city's Development Commission did review and approve the site development permit for this building. There was at least probably two of you that were on the commission at that time. And at that time, in the notice of decision and the findings of fact, and in the staff report that was written, there wasn't a whole lot said about signage in those. There were certainly no conditions about it. But this was the elevation that was approved at the time, and it did show these two spots here for tenant signs. And what the applicant has submitted to us now is an administrative adjustment of standards to allow tenant signs to be located there for tenants that are not on the third floor tenant spaces. And I'll explain that a little bit more in just a minute. And here's a picture of the building as it exists today. And then this also is a photo rendering that shows the new signs placed on it. And this, in a little bit more detail, shows what is proposed with regard to one of the new signs. And the reason we are here, and the reason that an administrative adjustment of standards is required, is because this building is within Central Issaquah, and the Central Issaquah Plan sign code does state that signs shall be located on the portion of a building's facade associated with the business it is advertising. And that has been a regulation in our sign code for many, many years. But we are given the applicant is given the option of applying for administrative adjustment of standards to locate a sign on an alternate frontage. And I'll read that sign code section in a minute. But one thing we did before we brought this forward to you is we did talk to the city attorney and basically said, okay, well, so what if the Development Commission in 2009 did specifically say that you could have signs there for tenants that are not on the third floor? And basically what the city attorney said is land use approval, like the site development permit that was approved, is valid for 3 years. And after that period of time, then whatever comes in needs to meet the current codes that are in place. And so we're reviewing it with the Central Issaquah Plan standards, which, as I said, has that statement with regard to sign location. And this past year, we received the application to have those 2 new signs put up. And I will let the applicant, in just a minute, kind of explain their reason for requesting that adjustment. This is the section of the Central Issaquah Plan that describes administrative adjustments of standards. And in particular, I wanted to point out the approval criteria at the bottom, because your decision on whether to approve or deny the administrative adjustment should be based on these approval criteria right here. But as I mentioned, the adjustment of standards is something that is in the code to allow some flexibility when we're reviewing applications, but also maintaining consistency with the vision and goals and policy while we're allowing for some flexibility. It talks about scope as well. There's a limit on what we can do administrative adjustments for and what we can't. And for example, with regard to signs, as you see under K here, we could not do an administrative adjustment to increase the number of signs a business can have. We could not do an administrative adjustment to allow signs, the types of signs that are already prohibited. And we also cannot do an administrative adjustment to increase letter height above the maximum allowed. But to allow signs on an alternate frontage is one of the things we can do administrative adjustments for. And as you see in number 3, it talks about the process that administrative adjustment of standards in Central Issaquah, most of them are done through a level 0 review process, which means it would just be through the sign permit, essentially, that we administratively would make that decision. But we do have an option to bump up the decision to a higher level of review. And that's what we've done tonight, is we, even though we could review and decide administratively, we would like the Development Commission to make the decision for a couple of reasons. One, because like I said, you looked at this and approved the building a few years ago. And then also, as I'll talk about, we're a little concerned about precedents. And so I think it'd be good for the commission to make that decision. And so, as I mentioned, these criteria is what the decision should be based on, and I'll just read through them real quick. The first is vision. Is the administrative adjustment, is the proposed alternative, is it equal or superior to the Central Issaquah Plan vision, goals, and policies? The proposal will not create negative impacts to the abutting properties, rights-of-way, dedicated tracts, or easements. With regard to compatibility, the proposal is compatible with the character of the surrounding properties and their potential development under the Central Issaquah Plan. Intent, the adjustment will be equal to or superior in fulfilling the intent and purpose of the original requirements. Safety, the proposal does not negatively impact any safety features on the project nor create any hazardous features. And finally, services, the proposal will not create negative impacts to public services. And so finally, as I mentioned, the administration, we are recommending denial of the administrative adjustment of standards. As I said, we're most concerned about the precedents that it's set, as the not allowing signs on walls other than your own. As I said, has been a long-standing regulation. We've had many discussion with applicants who for increased visibility wanted to locate their sign on somebody else's tenant space. And so, like I said, we're a little concerned if we open that door a little bit, the precedents that it might set. And then there's also challenges that would be involved if we start to allow this. One of them would be, how do we calculate the size of the sign? You know, would it be based on where the sign is located, the wall that the sign is located, or would it still be based on the wall facade of that particular tenant, even though it's on a different space? If the owners change, I know one of the things the applicants have mentioned is that they're only going to allow those two signs there. And even though the tenants that are on the third floor wouldn't be able to have their signs there. But as we know, owners change, and we will always be held to the sign code as far as what we can allow and what we can't. So we wouldn't be able to necessarily enforce rules that just apply to that particular building. And then I would just add, if you do support the application, if you do move to approve the administrative adjustment, I would just ask that you be real specific about what's unique about this situation, because again, we would be pointing to this decision when other people ask, and we'll have to see if they're in a similar situation or not. And then also, if this is something that, that you think the applicants should have the ability to do, and the Development Commission or the administration should be able to approve signs on somebody else's frontage, again, mention that as well, because that could turn into, say, a sign code amendment. So, like I said, I look forward to hearing what you have to say about it, and I will now turn it over to the applicant, who I know would like to make a presentation and make their case. So, Bob, if you want to just come on.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, and you can use the arrows to,
Up and down?
yeah.
Okay, I'll try and remember that. Go ahead. I'm Bob Fadden. I was the design architect on the building, and I'm very familiar with how the sign system was designed and how we set design standards for the building. The main thing about this site, and it was selected because it was on a very high-traffic highway and directly across from
You
the
need to,
transit center.
excuse me, sir, you need to speak into
A
the
very
microphone.
high-traffic highway, in fact, a major arterial street, not at all like what's in the central business district, other than the main street coming through town. And it was across the street from the new transit terminal to be built at that time. So the site had a series of challenges with it that it still has today. You can only access this site from one of the streets on the south, and every property on this highway in this area has the same issue. So the frontage is on a side that's inaccessible. And in fact, when you look on through this, you'll find that from a pedestrian standpoint, it's not really viewable. So you're all familiar with this road, and the different things around it. Let's see, what's going to get us to the next one? Up, Chris?
Down.
Down. Okay. So if we look at the site a little bit more, you'll see that there's a vehicle entry on the back side of the site on both Mall and Lee Street. Not Lee Street, I'm sorry, Mall Street and different
Maple.
project.
Maple.
Maple Street. And that both of those have been improved to provide access into the building, both for vehicles and for cars. The other thing that's unique about this site is that the tenancy in this building, the building's designed specifically for a medical office use. In doing that, it's got additional elevator sizes in it. It's got a special air conditioning system in it. It's got extra power. It's got backup power. And it has to have an image that portrays a practiced medical professional, not an ordinary office building, not a strip center. It has a specific image that it needs for those buildings to be successful. Since the building was built with those qualities to it, it's dedicated for that single use. So this is a unique situation here. Let's go down, right? Okay. So the building now has existing signage on it at two ends of it in the middle. The amount of signage on the building right now is slightly less than what's permitted by code. So this change in the signs on the existing building, which don't align with any tenant in there and never have, were only put on there as markers to recognize special medical professionals. There is no intent was ever considered in designing it, and in this type of building, the way that tenants find the building is by the building name. And that's very common in the medical. So this is the front side. When you're walking along, you're sitting in your car, this is what you're looking at, a major marquee sign and 2 other secondary signs. If you go over onto Mall Avenue, you're seeing basically the cars screened and nothing on the building. But there is a pedestrian entry off that side that leads you to the front of the building. So wayfinding, and on the opposite side, in amongst this, there's actually a sidewalk that we'll see in another slide that leads you into the building. So the wayfinding system here is the critical part of the design that has always been there, that leads people successfully from the transit center in there. So the fact that there's no signs on the front of the building is immaterial in terms of functional of an office building. Right, when you cross the intersection on, from the bus depot, the transit center, this is the view you have from the sidewalk. Clearly identifies the building. So this is the thing that Chris showed you before. The sign program had several elements in it. It had directory signs, it had individual signs, so when you got on site, you knew specifically where to go and what to do. And it also has a part inside the building where people can be dropped off out of the rain. That's a special function. This is a unique building. So we got 2 different systems. If you look at the blue dots, you can follow up the pictures that I've taken of how you get in the building, the wayfinding system. So this is in the wintertime when the plants are back, but you can see the sidewalk that leads you through the plants into there. And that's a little window that you can see through. And there's the sidewalk that actually runs along the street. And there's the sidewalk that runs down across to get you to the front. So the design of the sign system and the wayfinding replaces any need for having any signage because largely medical practitioners communicate not through signage on the building, but through professional publications and their webpage. So here's the front of the building. Oh, by the way, this comes out across the front. At one time we tried, before Chris worked at the city, we tried to get a connection to the boardwalk, which we couldn't do, which would have provided direct access for pedestrians into the building. But they would arrive at the main lobby. And this is the inside of the lobby. The minute you walk in, it has an identification system. On the board, every floor has an elevator that goes up. And at the end of the corridor, there's signage so that anybody coming into the building has a clear direction of how to get to the floor. Once they're inside the building and they go up 2 sets of stairs and they turn right, they have no idea where the front of the building is. So the second system we had was the vehicle process of getting into the building. And it's much the same sequence. We've got a driveway on one side that you can only go in and out of. We've got the central side located where you can see it from a car. And then inside the building, we even have signage that identifies where the lobby is once you get inside the parking garage. These are the original, these are the directory signs, so if you come by vehicle or you come as a pedestrian, you know who's in the building. These are directional signs that note that they say pick up, they say where additional parking is. More of a wayfinding system. Am I still going the right way? Oh, here we go. Yeah. So Our proposed sign plan is to replace those two signs, one on each end of the building, in the same location. There's no change in anything else on the site. There's no other units in there. Let's see if we can get to the next thing. We're not to 35, are we? Did I go by? Yep. Chris, can you help me a second? Can you look on the stick and see if there's another longer presentation?
Doesn't look like it. Looks like this was all that was on there.
Is there 35 slides in there? How many is in there?
Yeah, 35.
Okay, so we're missing some at the end. Okay. Okay, well, I have to apologize because I'm missing some of the signs at the end. The next set of slides have to do with home pages on websites. Within the building, here, let me pass these out here. How many people do we have? I think I have 10 of them.
All right, thanks.
I have them all copied.
So I'll enter this as exhibit number 4.
We need another one? Oh, good.
Everybody get one?
Nah, we're missing one if there's one more.
There's one more over here.
I've got one.
Got it, thanks. Thank you.
So the first sheet, of course, is the site plan showing where the different signs are that we looked at on the slides. The next page is a floor plan of the building on the first floor, which is the first level above parking. So when you look at that floor plan, you'll see that there are 3 tenants on the first floor. We begin on a medical office building to try and put signage on that based on where they're at. How are you going to do that if you only have one visible sign band on the building, which is the top signage area? So on the building, you only have really one visible place that you can see signs, which is the top of the building, because of the nature of the trail, the viewpoints that you have, the speed of the traffic going by there. So we only have one area, which is the top of the building, to put signage. Imagine what that would look like if it had signs stuck all over the building. Is that good architecture? Is that what they wanted? Did they want clutter of signs on buildings placed on a haphazard way? No, I don't think that's the objective. I think this is superior to anything that they have in the code. But the biggest issue is, how do you figure out, looking on the first floor plan, where you put signs on the building for each tenant? And then if we go to the second floor plan, the second floor level, we have the same issue. And the major tenants in the building are Overlake Clinic. They occupy 35% of the building, and the other one is UW Medicine. They occupy 35%. How do you figure out where you put signs on a building? And both of them have space on the front, some of them have space on the back. So by the sign code, somebody has to figure out how everybody gets signs on the front if you begin to allow more signs for each business in the building. So for a medical office building, that's why we have adjustments, because this code is written for commercial buildings that are not specialty and don't have special site considerations. Any questions?
Does that conclude the comments you wanted to make?
As far as compliance to each one of the individual elements in the code, when you go down the list that Chris presented, and you ask yourself, is this building going to look better with more signs plastered all over in a random way? No. So I would say that it meets the vision of having an organized sign program, and we've met the requirement to provide directions through alternate means, which we did originally on this project because we knew that it would be shielded and wouldn't be visible from the street. Is there any impact to negative properties from changing those signs out to a different sign with a different name in them? Are these signs out of character of any other signs in that neighborhood? No. Are the surfaces extraordinary and unique to the use in the building? Yes. And does this empower any safety of any element here? More signs is more traffic issues looking at signs, driving up and down the highway. To have them in a clearly visible location on the building that we have them is the safest way to deal with a major highway running in front of the building. Any questions?
Well, I think there will be some discussion. If you've concluded with your comments, since there's no public, I'll open the discussion and ask for commissioners for their thoughts. You're a member of the public.
I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Mark Robinson. Oh, can't hear that? Oh, it's recorded.
We're on television.
I'm sorry. Oh, that's right. My name is Mark Robinson, and I'm the owner of the building, Highmark Investments. I appreciate the commission's time tonight. I appreciate the staff working with us. This is Miss Patty Nelson, who runs our real estate group and specifically been working on this building since we constructed it. And we appreciate Bob, who's been with this project from day one, ground up. We hope that you look favorably on the things that Bob has brought to the forefront this evening. And we could have a homogeneous looking building with these wonderful clients that I'm very excited about, to tell you that we're looking like we've filled the final last space and a very wanted, very needed medical use out here, and that'll be Seattle Cancer Care Alliance, so that they can serve some of their East Side patients. With that, that concludes our program. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry I overlooked you. So comments first?
Questions?
Questions first and then comments, I'm sorry. How about questions?
I have a question. How many tenants are in the building?
8.
And what capacity does it have?
It has space for one more tenant.
Okay.
It has CC8, one more tenant.
Can you please step to the microphone? Sorry, I should have asked you to step back up.
Yeah, we can go backwards. And if you look on your little drawing I gave you, you'll see a vacant space on the second floor. And there's about 2,900 square foot of space left for potentially for somebody to expand that's already in the building or for another use.
So you're only asking for permission for 2 signs?
We're asking permission to replace 2 signs on the building in the same location that they have been, unrelated to where the tenants were from the day that the building was built.
And so you never see a need for a sign for each individual tenant? That's
No.
all provided by the wayfinding in the lobby?
I did not design the building for anything more than 3 signs.
Okay. Perfect. All right, that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Other questions?
I guess one other question. I presume it looks like there's a sign there now for the DW Medical Clinic that's on the second floor. That would come off.
Right.
Right.
That's a temporary banner.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Christopher, I have a question for you. Are you able to pull up the section 9.76? I was looking at the administrative adjustment standards and the development standards, and it seemed to be different than the one that's in our
They are
package.
different. It's in my letter.
It comes from 1.1.
Okay. It's in my letter.
Okay.
Do you have the number?
Well, let me see. So you want to go to the Central Issaquah Plan standards?
Yeah, the development standards, the section 9.
So which
This would be
section?
9.76.
Okay.
Nine point 7.6?
7.6, yeah. Kind of way down there. I was looking at this is the administrative adjustment of standards approval criteria, and it's slightly different than the administrative adjustments approval criteria that's in our package, section 1.1. And it looks like the two things, number one, it has the 5 items, but it doesn't have services. The 6th item in section 1.1 was services that will not create negative impacts. And then it has a more detailed discussion. Instead of instead of intent, it talks about sufficient reason. And then the third thing was item E, that conditions can be imposed upon the grant of any adjustment. So in other words, if we were going to approve an administrative adjustment standards, we can include a condition with that then?
That's right. Yeah, so these would be the criteria that we will be using, that you'll be using in your decision. Not what's in the memo, but these would be the criteria to use.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you hold it
Yeah, I'll keep this up
a
here.
little bit bigger, please, for those of us who are vision challenged?
There's a chair up, there's a chair up front.
I just get one up and read it closer.
Bottom right. Bottom right.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, Mel, your point was on, or Commissioner Morgan, I'm sorry, on conditions, what is,
Well, so when you look at item 4, sufficient reason, in the package, the approval criteria we have, it's intent.
right,
It says equal to or superior in fulfilling the intent or purpose. Item 4 has a different kind of wording,
yeah,
talking about extraordinary circumstances and so forth. And then the conditions part, that we can impose conditions on our decision if we want.
That's correct. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. I guess one of the, a question that would come up in my mind, a question for you would be, if we had a condition that said the only tenant signs can be on the east side of the building could be those 2 locations, would that be acceptable?
That's what we're asking you to say.
Right. So no other sign locations? Right.
Couple of questions. On the photo mock-up that we saw, the rendering, I take it, is that 1 or 2 signs on the left side, the University of Washington Medical Center urgent care?
On the right side,
You'll have to be at the microphone.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. The one on the right side is the one I think you're asking about. And there was 2 panels shown in that sign. It does not have to be 2 panels. It can be one tenant. We're
Okay,
just-
so I'm looking at, I guess, stage right, but looking at the left side of the building in our view right here.
Yeah,
That's the
that's-
University of Washington Medical Center and Urgent Care sign,
That's
correct?
what they have in the building. They have that in the building, both of
Okay.
those. See, they occupy 2 tenant spaces in the building. They occupy 30%. So it's, the University of Washington is the tenant. And that's a description of what they also do in that suite.
Right, and I guess I'm asking, that is a single sign, correct?
Right, yeah, that's a single sign.
Yeah, although I perceive it, at least in this rendering, as 2 different signs.
No, yeah, the way that the sign is built, it has a raceway box in back of it. And it's
Understand.
one continuous box, and then the acrylic letters are pushed out and they're backlit so they glow around the letter and create the sign.
Yeah, and so that's a little different signage technology than is being used here today, is that right, on the existing
the-
ones, not this one, but the other
Yeah,
ones?
the technology that used today, that was used originally, was never successful.
Right, understand.
Yeah.
And these are backlit, correct?
These are backlit, yeah, and the original letters are backlit too, but they have their channel letters with a neon tube inside them, which for a practical side for an individual tenant is impossible to use.
Right.
But
Right.
they're a different discussion.
And this rendering, at least, obviously, these colors are different from the signage on the rest of the front of the building, correct? We have brand colors here behind University of Washington. We have their
We have their-
brand logo font, and next to that, we have the red background for urgent care.
Yeah, and then on the other side, whatever sign that we end up putting up there is going to be a single sign too.
And that might be a different organization with different brand colors, different, and so on.
Right, right.
And so I guess that raises a question in my mind, and I'm thinking about staff's concern regarding precedent. If, let's say, there's another client who occupies 40% of the building in the future, and it's a vibrant orange background color and logo color, do we permit that as well? So that's the question this raises in my mind. It seems that we're addressing the idea of placement of the sign vis-a-vis the code, but there are also other changes here in regarding the perception of the number of signs that's really occurring here, as well as the brand logo and background colors, the vibrancy of the colors that's used. So a question for staff. Chris, does the Architecture and Urban Design Manual, I guess that's being incorporated as Chapter 18 of the SIDS, is that right? My overall question is, does that manual and those standards apply
The
to
central
this building?
Issaquah plan standards do apply here, yes.
Yeah. So I guess that would raise another question to me. Would this be a Northwest contemporary building in terms of those standards? And if so, would those color requirements apply?
Though I don't know that sign color is covered by building color.
I'm in agreement with you that I don't believe the sign color really has to go with the building color, because if it's McDonald's, and that's the right colors, they're still going to have a yellow logo.
I guess my question, I don't know if it's even really basically relevant, but in this day and age of being guided to your destination by a manufactured voice, I guess I don't really understand if it's the Highmark building and there's a clear indication of this is the Highmark building at this address. I'm not really clear about why more signage is necessary.
I can understand your question, because, you know, the question comes to me, do you allow any signage other than the building? And the answer to that really is a prestigious client wants to be recognized, and that's what draws them to the building. So in order to meet the market demand of the practitioner, a major tenant has an expectation, just like they do on an office building, of having their name on it, in addition to the office building name. But it's purely an expectation of the tenant in the marketplace.
So this isn't primarily so people can find the destination. This is a client recognition.
Right, yeah, yeah. Yeah, because if you looked at those, excuse me, if you looked at the cuts, the homepage cuts, how many of them have a picture of the entry of the building on it? You know, and some of them have, almost all of them have the name of the building on it. And the ones that don't have the name have a number which is placed up high on the ends of the building so you can see it coming from either direction.
So Christopher, the medical building on the north side of 90, where the underpass is, I'm not aware of that having any external practice signs on
Not for
the
individual
external.
tenants, you're right. It says Issaquah Medical or
Right.
for the building, similar to the Highmark medical sign there. But yeah, I don't think tenants have signage on the exterior there.
Okay, thank you.
There is a directory board sign in this building, right, that lists tenants? I think I saw that on one
Yeah,
slide.
there's a directory board sign, and then at each one of the driveway entrances, there's a directory board sign too. And then you get inside the building and there's endless amount of direction.
You know what the hours are of the urgent care operation?
Pardon?
You know what the hours are of the urgent care operation?
Andy? Yeah.
Yeah, but, sorry, you have to come to the microphone. Get you on TV.
And introduce yourself, please.
UW Medicine's urgent care operations are 7 days a week. They are there open to the public until 8 p.m. during the week, until 6 o'clock on Saturday, and from 8 to 5 on Sundays.
Would you state your name, please?
Oh, sorry, Patty Nelson.
Thank you.
Anything else?
So in terms of, I guess one thought is, in terms of somebody that needs to go to urgent care on SR 900, see at 7 o'clock at night, and it's a dark, to see a sign, this would be an illuminated sign, they would know,
Yes,
cut my finger off, here's where I need to go.
Yes, speaking for UW, that was one of the objectives, is they wanted the urgent care portion to be extremely visible for wayfinding.
Right.
So I have a question. How long has the urgent care been in the facility?
They have been in there since January of 2017 as UW Medicine. Urgent care opened their doors, that portion of their clinic, in July of 2017.
Okay. So are there, I won't say that. What services have not been redeemed because there wasn't a sign there today?
I don't have the
Can
answer
you-
to that question. I can't speak on,
People are finding the urgent care place somehow.
with what amount of ease I can't speak to.
Thank you.
The question now, urgent care is quite different from emergency services,
Correct.
correct? Could you characterize urgent care for us a little bit?
I would call it a walk-in clinic, not an emergency room. They have transported patients to the emergency room. I oftentimes will receive phone calls letting me know there'll be a vehicle left in the parking lot overnight because they've had to have a patient transported. So I think it's realistic to assume that just like any other urgent care place, it's one step potentially on the way to the emergency.
A good example, my wife hurt her finger a few days ago. The clinic couldn't take her in at Virginia Mason, and so she didn't want to go to the emergency room because it wasn't that bad, but went to urgent care to get an x-ray.
I think it's the middle ground between just a walk-in clinic and the emergency. So.
Sorry, I want to say we also have other examples in the area of other urgent cares that have very large urgent care signs facing major streets. We've allowed those in the past.
Right,
So like the Overlake over by Fred Meyer's.
which is where my wife went, yeah. She knew it was there because of the signs.
Exactly.
Who is our other major tenant in the building as this relates to signage? Overlake is.
Other questions?
Just to reiterate, these will not, these signs, if they're approved and they're illuminated, they will go off when the office closes. They will not be on all night. Is that correct?
Bob, do you have the answer to that,
Oh.
as far as the design of them goes?
Yeah, I mean, they can be-
Microphone?
Oh, sorry. Bob Fadden back again. The signs are on a separate metered circuit in the electrical room with a timer on them. So they actually go on and off now that you can't tell them. You can't tell. But the intent is that they're not illuminated at night. They're only illuminated at the times that businesses are open.
Christopher, I'm not familiar enough with the SIDS code with regard to signs. Is that a requirement as opposed to the goodwill of the tenant in question?
It's not something that we regulate. As far as, there's nothing that says signs have to be turned off when the business is not in business.
Okay.
I come back to the colors for a moment.
Sure.
I believe, is it a requirement that colors that are going to be used on signs have to be specified in a permit? Is that correct?
That's right.
So do we have a clear idea of how many colors could potentially appear on the front of this building? In other words, are these signs that we're seeing here and considering tonight the only colors that would be used for secondary signs? Do we know what colors we're facing here?
I think it's impossible at this time to know in the future what a color will be on the actual signboard. Right now, the UW has their signature colors. Overlake has their signature colors. But what the next tenant does would be subject to the regulatory process of colors on signs. The building colors are fixed. Okay?
And I'm wondering, I guess, how we as a commission would address that.
Well, typically, I mean, on signs, it's been sign colors is specific to each sign that comes in front of us. But I don't think we've ever tried to limit sign color to a limited palette of colors. Again, because it's large part branding for companies and.
Right.
And Christopher, I guess another question, are we just looking at the approval of the sign location for this, and staff is doing the sign approval itself?
Yeah, the administrative adjustment standards is just for the sign location. Subsequently, then, we will be reviewing the actual sign permit application that will include the installation details, the illumination, the colors. What you see, that's what will be next is we'll review the sign permit application.
Would that be done at staff level?
It would
this
be,
type?
but there's no reason you couldn't comment on it.
So I want to make sure I have it clear in my head. Right now, we're just looking at the signs on the south side of the building, the UW and the urgent care,
East side.
or the east side. On the west side, then there could be two other signs for two different tenants.
No, there'll be one sign box for a single tenant.
The intent is to have one tenant signage on each corner, so not multiple tenants on each corner.
I believe he's asking if there's going to be signage on the opposite side of the building from this one, the one we're looking at.
No.
No. You're talking about the ends of the building?
No, the
west side.
The west side.
We're looking at the east
west side of
here.
the building looks at what's supposed to be permanent open space, but right now it's a storage yard. So, yeah, the west side.
You wanna go back to the screen?
Yeah. So if we go here, the west side of the building looks at all these industrial buildings across there.
So where's the directional sign?
The direction.
You have to just,
Yeah, let me just go back here. Let's see if we can get a different one up. Are we on your stuff, Chris? I know where all
I
this
see.
stuff.
Yeah,
Switch
thanks.
over to mine if we can go down. Yeah, go over to mine and it's got in it. Okay, yeah.
Directional sign?
Go back to,
Oh, yeah, yeah, let's
keep going. Yeah, let me go to her. Okay, so The directional signs are where they're shown on this site plan, and they're actually in place in the field. They're by, the directories are by each driveway, and the directional signs are located in the islands where they're appropriate to direct people in different places. Let's see if we can get some pictures of them here.
So there's on A1.3, there in the upper left, there is an item, it's called an entrance sign, and below it is the directional sign. So the entrance signs are there at the entrance to the parking lot on the, let's see, the southwest corner and the northwest corner.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and, well, no, yeah,
Would that be helpful?
sure.
So the monument signs that's in the upper left-hand corner of that drawing are located right here and in the exact opposite corner. So that is, they're both.
Okay, and where is the directional sign?
You're going to have to go internal, showing on here. The directional signs.
It says patient drop-off.
Yeah, the directional signs are located in these islands. And this island, that island, the same thing on the other end.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see if I can.
Other questions?
Yes.
Other comments?
Well, are we going to deliberate on the potential?
Sure. If you would like to.
I would. I guess my view as I take away from this now, when you're asking for an exception to the rules gauged on screening it through this criteria, is that you have an extraordinary circumstance. And/or I may be adding my own words to this, but what is afforded to one should also be afforded to another. So I take this building in particular, is accessed by a common lobby, and all of the tenants are accessed by a common lobby versus a storefront configuration. Say Overlake Urgent Medical has a storefront. You go in a storefront. So the sign being right over the tenant makes sense. So I feel like if they have the potential to be afforded signage, shouldn't also a comparable business be afforded the same rights and privileges? Therefore, their extraordinary circumstance is that they just don't have a storefront-oriented building. They have more of an office lobby entrance type building with multiple tenants within. So if I look at it in that context, I feel like they should have the sign. But I would like to hear what you guys think as well. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes.
I think it's the type of building. And so if urgent care, they should have the potential to advertise their urgent care. Now, granted, they could go find another place for their urgent care. That's a potential too. But I just feel like the use is approved. So shouldn't they then be afforded the same privilege as another? That's my view.
Christopher, what is the city's reservation about this request for an AAS?
Well, as I said, it would be the first time that we would be approving a sign on somebody else's tenant space.
Can I, remember the Remax building? Were you involved in that on Front Street? Just north of the
Yeah,
Orange
I mean,
Theater?
there are a couple of examples when there is shared common area, like that was either a stairwell or bathrooms that are
Okay.
shared by everybody in the building. That's
Okay.
about as stretched as we've gotten on that alternate frontage. But yeah, those are a couple of examples. Again, it wasn't somebody else's tenant space, it was shared tenant space, but it wasn't on somebody else's wall.
Right.
Well, I agree with my colleague here and his comments, but the thing that kind of is giving me pause is that the indication that this is not for patients rather, to find where they're going. It's because the clients want their name out there. And frankly, I'm not sure that's grounds for an adjustment of code. I mean, I think it's legitimate for the client to want that, but I'm having a little trouble saying, yeah, we ought to give an adjustment AAS because one of the tenants are high prestige elements and they want the Huskies sign and colors out there on the building. I'm not sure that's a legitimate reason.
This is
And
where I
I'm-
disclose that I'm a
neither a
proud
Cougar
UW
nor a Husky, by the
graduate,
way.
so.
Say again?
Is this where I disclose I'm a proud UW graduate and?
Well, your shirt speaks for itself.
I can see where you're coming from that. But however, it is an urgent care, and sometimes people don't know exactly what one is when they need one. And if they're driving down the street, it'd be nice to have the signage there that they could recognize that as a place they can go at 7 o'clock at night if they have, like you said, their finger falling off. I think visibility is important to the business and the clientele and the ability to attract clientele for that kind of business. And, it's not, I don't think it's just to get their name on the board, but also to advertise what they're doing there. So there is some use there. It's not just a medical building with people's offices, it's also an urgent care, which is a slightly different use case than just, optometrists.
I agree. I didn't know what that building was until the banner went up. I had no idea UW Medical was in there. And so for me, it is helpful to know where these things are, just creating a mental image of what's where. That's just how I get around. But I guess another way to look at this too is, aren't they meeting the spirit or the intent of the code in that the signage should be situated where in the space the tenant is occupying? Well, it is. The tenant's in that building, and so if you look at it as a building versus a unit, I think it meets the spirit of the code. It is where the tenant is.
Christopher, could you pull up on the screen and say the shot or pull up the shot that shows the view from SR 900, the building, especially the one that shows the proposed sign?
It's in the end of there if you want.
And I've got it in mind too.
This, I guess one way I would look at this is, when we go through the criteria, the vision, the proposed alternative equal or superior to the Central Issaquah Plan vision, goals, and policies. And I think in terms of the location of the sign seems appropriate. To not have multiple signs all over the building, to me, seems appropriate. I think if we didn't know who the tenant was, if they were just signs and there were just signs at those locations, I think it would fit with architectural attractiveness. It won't impact the access, it won't impact the safety. I think it's going to be compatible with other buildings. I don't think there's anything that would be incompatible with. So it comes down to sufficient reason in my mind. And what would strike me here is that a couple things. One, because of the use, because of an urgent care, but more importantly, the way the building is set back, it's designed in the pre-Central Issaquah Plan design standards, where it's set back fairly far from a fast-moving highway with a boardwalk, and then the substantial amount of vegetation in between, and signs lower down on the building are very unlikely to be seen by anybody. And when I look at the sign code intent, contribute to the economic well-being of the community, I don't think signs that people don't see are going to help. And encourage signage that's functional, whimsical, artful, creative, and attractive. I think it would be attractive, and I think it's more functional at the top. And I guess for that, I would, if this building was being built under the new Central Issaquah code at the street, then I don't think we would have as much of an issue, because you could have a sign in the middle of the building on the second floor and it would be visible. In this case, I don't think that's the case. I think that would, the other thing I would say, my limitation would be a condition that the only signs, other than the building sign in the center on this facade, would be the 2 sign locations shown on the 3rd floor, so that we don't get any more signs in addition to this. And so that would be, I would view as the exception that would, I know about precedents because I truly understand the importance of that, but I can see, given that this design of this building, pre-Central Issaquah plan, the location, the visibility, that we could have this as an administrative adjustment.
I agree.
Clarification on, now, the maximum number of secondary signs that can be on this building per code is 2, is that right?
No. I mean, so you're using the term secondary sign, so each tenant could have a sign on their tenant space. If they have more than one frontage, if they're on a corner, then that tenant could potentially have 2, a primary sign and a secondary sign.
So we could end up with signs on the 1st floor, the 2nd floor, the 3rd floor.
Yep.
Or we could make conditions for the variance. Right? We can make conditions.
Mention that these would be the only sign
Right.
locations
Yeah.
we have.
Right.
Yeah, I may have misread this. I thought in 917B, it said that a maximum of 2 primary and 2 secondary signs were allowed on this type of thoroughfare.
That's per tenant, not per building.
So are you saying the potential is for 10 primary and secondary signs here?
Again, it depends on how many tenants are on that facade. Because
That's how they
again, the way that-
define it per facade.
It's per tenant space facade area, basically.
Okay. So these 2 secondary signs were simply part of the permit that was part of this building originally?
Right.
It was specific to this building?
And their location. Because they're not necessarily on top of the facade that correlates to the business that's being done.
Can we place a condition that limits code potential? Meaning, we approve the variance or the exception, that's it. You can't then ask for additional signs.
Except unless you want another AAS in there.
Yeah. Could you read the condition criteria again?
So let's see, so conditions may be imposed upon the grant of any adjustment unless otherwise specified. The adjustment shall be subject to all plan specifications and conditions set forth in the application. So if they came back and said, we want to put another sign somewhere else in the building, even though there's a condition that says we can't do it, we'd say, well, you have a sign that's for tenant not in that location. To have that be allowed, you can't do that other sign.
Yeah. I'm honestly, I'm not sure the answer to that. The reason I hesitate is if we put that condition on it again, there's the 3 years that a land use decision is valid for, and what happens after that. And that was, we had to consult our city attorney about that.
Even with administrative adjustment?
Well, and then it might depend on what the code that's in place at the time, if that hasn't changed at all.
That would seem strange that after 3 years that your condition to your adjustment would go away.
And that may be possible. Again, then it becomes a non-conforming sign.
Sort of seem to obviate the purpose of having the condition.
So summarizing what I think I've heard, it sounds like there's general agreement that approval of this particular sign, these particular signs would be acceptable. There's concern about what may happen in the future. Is that what I'm hearing?
And my concerns are around, as I said, colors, number of competing brand colors we could have on the front of the building, depending on how many secondary signs are allowed.
Yeah. And so the sense would be that we could, if we were to approve it, we would be inclined to condition it so that there wouldn't be other competing signs put up. And then the issue is, how long would that stay in effect?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, I know the applicants are open to enforcing that restriction themselves, but I'm stopping short of saying that the city would be able to enforce something above and beyond, that's more restrictive than what the code allows. The applicant certainly can do that, but I don't know if the city could.
Even if it's a condition to an administrative adjustment.
So what is the desire of the commission?
Well, can I ask one more question? What if, can we explore the path of not accepting the exception? Then what is there, I guess, would be my question. Because as it sounds, none of the tenant spaces correlate to the facade that the signage is on. So are we suggesting that there would be no signage as an alternative? Like what happens if we decline the variance, or the adjustment, sorry.
I have a suggestion. Do you have that picture that shows that banner sign? One of the photos shows that.
So it's just blank? Oh, there's one.
I think that was in one of these. You can kind of see it in that one, right there.
Right.
It's a little clearer in one of the further ones up.
Excuse me?
It's a little clearer on one of the other pictures. There it is.
Yeah.
So if the adjustment was denied, then only the third floor tenants that are in those spaces up there would be able to have their signs up there.
But we could,
On the second floor, they could have additional, the second floor tenants could have signs on that floor, and first floor tenants could have signs on the first floor.
yeah.
Okay.
Wait, if the request for an
microphone.
adjustment is, if the request for adjustment is denied, there could be more signs?
Right.
Yeah, they could do Lake Washington Vascular, EPA, and the medical, Dr. Okamoto, sorry.
Could you restate that comment that you just made about could there be more signs? And I would say, yes, there could be, but we have regulated our building to look like it does professionally, and asking that UW sign be placed where we're proposing to place it, even though that's not where they're currently located. We as the owner, I as the owner, are regulated within our leases and our proposals to everyone that's in the building when they can and can't use that signage on top, and that's the only place that we propose to do that, except for standing monument signs. I understand the larger overall city question regarding the next guy, the next girl, the next building. We're looking at this as we did the day we started to lease the building, the day we designed it and put it up there. And that's all we're asking to do today. The inner workings of how that works within the city, we'll certainly leave that to the staff And if I was to start a new building across the street, well, up the street here, I certainly understand that there's standards today that I would be handed that I would have to develop under. But I'm just trying to stay in the same standards that I looked at, the same vision that we had when we first offered this building up for medical services. We've actually turned down a number of more retail-type businesses to get where we're at today, fully medical. And frankly, we have some really great clients here in Issaquah, UW, of course, Overlake, and now Seattle Cancer Care, along with other, dentists and so on and so forth. So I just want to make sure that, we're not trying to change the world here. We're trying to remain within a vision that we had and an acceptance at the original point of development and when we first leased the building out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you're right. We could end up with the first floor, a sign of that's a Dr. Akamoto, UW Medicine, the second floor having EPA, like Washington Vascular, third floor, and all those facades there could be signs.
Right.
More comments?
Well, I think right now by statute, they are allowed those signs. They're just asking, we don't want to have those signs, we'd rather just have these two. That's what the
Right.
applicant's asking.
And can I ask a question? If they want to deviate from that, then would it be a level 0 review, or would it go back to a level 2 and it would come back before us?
If they wanted to deviate from this proposal,
Beyond what we accept in this proposal, should we accept this proposal?
it would be, by code, it'd be administrative. But like I said, just like we did this time, we would have the option of bumping it up to the commission for review, which I would think would be likely if this was something you've already heard.
Okay.
Sorry, one other question. There would be no review, and it'd just be administrative if they wanted to put signs above every one of those windows that correlates to their
Tenant space?
current tenants.
That's right.
The only reason we're reviewing is they don't want to do that, and they'd rather only have 2 clean signs on either side.
It's because they want signs on tenant spaces other than those tenants.
Got it.
I think we end up with a better looking building.
Agree.
So more comments? Somebody have a notion of a proposal or a motion that they feel compelled to make?
Mel's really good at that.
He's the master.
He already has it written out. No.
Language, so, Mr. Chair,
Yeah, yes, sir.
I move that we approve the administrative adjustment of standards for the Highmark Medical Center signage file number AAS 17-0009. Based on the, if I pause for a second, Susan, Christopher, do you want the discussion about what it's based on as part of that too, for,
I think that'd be appropriate, yes.
yeah. Based on the extraordinary conditions regarding the building in terms of tenancy and setback from SR 900 and visibility of signs in other locations, and as well as a condition that no other signs would be allowed on the east side of the building other than the 2 locations proposed.
Can we go one step further and just say all locations or all sides of the building versus the east side?
Well, we probably need a second first.
Okay, sure.
So did somebody second it? Okay, the motion's been seconded. Now, comment or discussion.
So I guess my thought would be, I'm not sure if something else goes in behind this building at some point, I don't know that I would want to limit signage on the west side.
Okay.
I think I guess we're only approving the eastern facade. I don't know if we need to make that clear in the approval, but.
I don't think
Part
you
of the
need to. No,
package,
it's, it's a given.
Okay, that's fair. I agree.
Commissioner Harrison, you have something to say?
No.
Additional discussion? So we're ready.
One more. I don't think we ever really addressed negative precedent. Do we feel like we're setting a negative precedent? I'll just ask that question.
Well, Commissioner, it seems to me that whether it's negative, I mean, the very nature of what we're doing here is setting a precedent. I would just say what I was going to say earlier and decided not to, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyways. I hope that the condition, I think it is, Commissioner Morgan, but to me, the unique situation is that by specifying the two locations that we're doing, I'm not sure that we said, made it clear for people looking at this in the future that the alternative to denying the application is the possibility of the facade being covered with signs. I'm not sure would be clear to somebody 4 years from now looking at this decision. And I think that should be articulated in the condition or in the approval process, because if I vote for this, it's going to be because the alternative is a facade covered with signs. So this is the Development Commission's ability to stop that from happening. And I think that needs to be
So,
part of it.
so if we were to modify the motion or make an amendment to the motion to include a sentence that in effect said, in lieu of the proliferation of signs that may be, the potential proliferation of signs, this is avoiding that, and something fancier, saying something fancier than that, but
So,
Go ahead.
well, maybe I can propose an amendment then, because so Susan, I guess at the end of the condition, it said, do you have,
What you said,
yeah,
move we approve the administrative adjustment of standards for Highmark Medical Center for the file number based on the extraordinary conditions regarding the building in terms of tenancy and setback from SR 900, visibility of signs from other locations, as well as a condition that no other signs would be allowed on the east side of the building other than the two locations proposed.
and so right after that, I guess a comma, which would, or to prevent a proliferation
say
of,
that.
yeah, she knows how to spell it.
Let me offer, I would say instead of a comma, maybe a period. And
Okay.
the Development Commission wishes to make clear, for purposes of future reference, that the uniqueness of this proposal is that denial of the application, the request for an adjustment of standards, could result in a proliferation of signs on the same facade, which the commission finds to be unacceptable. Or words to that effect.
Or might I add that in the SIDS, I think we have wording that addresses this: recognize the role signs have in creating a visually interesting and attractive place, ... while avoiding visual distraction, clutter, and chaos. And that's really what we're doing here, probably in a positive frame.
Yeah, I guess back to your comment, Randy, in terms of saying the commission, the multiple signs that we don't, I'd want to be careful, because if it's something that can be done by code, and if we come out and say, we don't want to allow what can be done by code,
Yeah.
that could be a problem. I think I'd want to put it in terms of a more positive light, that it will result in a more attractive building that meets the vision of,
With a specific limitation on the number of signs,
yeah, the limitations.
specific limitation on the number of signs, as opposed to,
in
if we
general.
don't do this, as I understand it again, each client could request a sign on the
Yeah.
facade of the building.
Well, I think it's a limitation on the number and the locations.
Yeah, yes.
Or another way to look at it would be that one of the other things that's unique about this application is that the applicants are agreeing to the fact that these are going to be the only 2 signs on that elevation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to amend the specificity to include that this is a shared-use building with a single lobby versus like a strip mall may be considered a single building because it's one long building. And someone may ask to put a sign in front of on somebody else's frontage, where this is a completely different concept of a building type, right? That this decision is based on the fact that it is a shared office building rather than a strip mall.
Yeah, to say that this is part of the reason we're doing this is because it's a multi-story office building, not a single-story retail.
It's not,
Multi-tenant, multi-story office building.
So it would be valuable to hear what the proposal is with the amendment.
Okay, so we have what Susan read to us before.
I think after you,
Susan, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
oh, I'm sorry. After you said, let's see, allowed on the east side of the building other than the 2 locations. No other signs would be allowed on the east side of the building other than the 2 locations proposed. And then to put your comment in a more positive light, would result in a more attractive building that still meets the vision with a specific limitation on the number and location of signs allowed. And then you said about it being a shared-use building with a shared lobby, a multi-tenant building, so those 3 things.
Yeah, so maybe what we could do for Roberts, maybe in the discussion of the uniqueness of it, the
you mentioned.
extraordinary
Yeah,
circumstances.
you have the setback, and I remember someone else mentioned there was a pre-SIDS building, so it was the current, so those things should all be in there. These are the hurdles that had to be leaped in order to get to this point where we say, yes, it's fine for the signs, is that it has to be the pre-SIDS, the setback, the visibility from the street, as well as a shared-use multi-story office building.
So yeah, to that list of extraordinary conditions, it's a multi-tenant, multi-story office building. Does that work?
Yes.
So that fits in there, and then the add-on to the condition about, or a separate sentence you'd prefer, Randy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just grammatically it gets a little long to have, so yeah,
Right.
a separate sentence.
Okay.
Sorry, thinking about wording.
So a unique situation to avoid the proliferation of potential additional signs.
On multiple floors.
But it's also to limit the scope of this decision to this type of building. Right? That's the whole purpose of this, is we want to limit the scope to this type of building and come up with the reasoning as to why we think it's fine for the signs to be there.
Yeah, so, well, I think now we're just thinking about that additional sentence and how to word that
Yeah.
in terms of the proliferation of sign. Well, the Development Commission believes that
Yeah.
the limitation of 2 signs at the upper portion of the building will result in a more attractive building in line with the central Issaquah visions. Sorry,
Okay, the upper portion of the building will result in a more attractive,
building that is in line with the central Issaquah visions in comparison to the potential proliferation of multiple signs on multiple floors of the building. That work?
Yeah. And at this point, it may sound like we're trying to indemnify ourselves because the bottom line is this will come up again.
Well,
But it'll be out there.
yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm going back to the original guidance that we got from staff and the request from him to be as specific and as articulate as we can be about why we have taken the decision that we've done tonight. I just think we owe that to whoever's on a mission and in Christopher's position 5, 6, 8 years from now.
Well, we're all going to be
Gonna
here,
have
right?
Yeah. But we haven't voted on it.
Yeah, we are. That's right.
Okay.
I agree, because I think if they'd come in and said, here are 6 different signs of the building, and we want to move this tenant sign from here to there, we may be less inclined.
Any additional discussion? Are we ready for a vote? Are we ready for a vote? All those in favor of approving the administrative adjustment as the motion indicated with the condition, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Looks like it's a deal.
Okay, thank you. So 5-minute
Thank you for
break.
coming in.
5-minute break.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Only 45 minutes to sign. Not bad. I already filled this out online,
That's what Randy was saying. You can do this as well.
so. Oh, a second time?
This is a different, yeah, this is a kind of a different format. I'll explain it in just a minute. Same questions?
Other discussion.
Yeah. Okay, so we're just going to change gears now after the formal part of our meeting. And what I'm presenting to you now, or what we're going to talk about, is the city has entered into a strategic plan process. And what we are doing right now is we're trying to gather as much public input as we can from as many different places as we can. And we're kind of doing a surge over the next month and a half or so. And we're visiting and getting input from easy targets like you guys who are existing boards and commissions, because we know you're already very vested and engaged in the community. Last week, for example, I also met with like the Friends of Lake Sammamish State Park. We're also, in addition to meeting with boards and commissions, we're setting up what we call a little pop-up stands, like at the library and at the Pickering Barn during the open markets, just at Central Park during ball games. And we're just trying to be out there and just collect as much input and direction for the strategic plan as we can. And so normally when I facilitate these things, I don't necessarily like reading a script, but for this I want to make sure you guys get it. Now we're televised, but you're not representing the Development Commission here. So your answers shouldn't be based on your commission perspective, but instead on your perspective as residents or people that just live, work, and play here in the city. And so keep that in mind. Like I said, you take off your commission hat and just be an interested citizen. So as I said, today we'll be participating in the City of Issaquah strategic planning process. This is a structured exercise, and it's an opportunity for us to give input into the vision and priorities we believe the city should focus its resources on achieving. We will begin by describing the strategic plan process. Afterwards, we will move into the questions. And there's 5 questions, which will give us an opportunity to provide our input on Issaquah's vision for the future and priorities. And I've routed to you, there's a sign-in sheet. It looks like I've got that. And also, there's also a form for you to fill out with regard to just kind of your background. Okay, so you've got those. Okay. And this exercise is supposed to take about an hour or about a half an hour, but I've never seen you guys only take a half an hour on anything, so we'll see. Okay, so what is this project about? The City of Issaquah has launched work on a citywide strategic plan to affirm a shared vision for our community. This planning process will engage many people who live, work, and play in Issaquah to unite around a common set of goals and priorities. Your participation will help the city align its resources with the activities that have the most value for the public. What is a strategic plan? A strategic plan is a document used to help guide the city's priorities, goals, and actions. It creates a roadmap used by the mayor, city council, and staff to achieve community-wide goals. Why are we a part of this? The City of Issaquah would like to engage with a broad cross-section of people who, as I said, live, work, and play in our community. Understanding the vision and priorities of community members will help us guide the strategic plan and thus its goals and actions in the near term. As I mentioned, the city is taking steps to encourage community members to provide input, including this, what we call meeting in a box that we're kind of taking as a roadshow to different meetings, community pop-up booths, as I mentioned, and then just being at various events and focus groups in the city. And as I mentioned, there's the online survey that you can take as well. And those people at home, anybody watching, I would encourage you to take the online survey. Okay, so the second page of what I handed out to you is this chart here that is the strategic plan process. And basically, this graphic represents the process Issaquah is currently undertaking to develop the strategic plan, and there are 3 phases. We are currently in phase 1. In other words, we're kind of in that box over on the left-hand side. And this first phase includes a variety of opportunities for community input, as I mentioned, and the city will be obtaining a clear understanding of the vision, mission, and values of the community and residents. And then during phase 2, the where we want to go phase, the city staff work groups will use input from phase 1 to develop goals and objectives. And those goals will continue to check in with the community as this continues. And then during phase 3, the how we will get there, implementation work groups will create action plans and performance measures to evaluate the progress on those actions. At the conclusion of this phase, the community-based strategic plan will be reviewed and then ultimately adopted by the city council. So as you can see, there are a lot of components here. And if you're interested in learning more, there's also there's the page on the city's website, and I can answer any questions you may have as well. And if I can't answer them, I can point you to somebody who can. So, as I mentioned, there are 5 questions, and I'm going to kind of walk you through those, and you've got a copy of what each of those are. And like I said, we'll probably try to take 5 or so minutes with each one, so keep that in mind. I do want to hear from all of you, so please speak up. And I will be just kind of taking notes up here that I will then convey on to the team that's collecting all of this input. So just so you know. So the first question is, what do you personally value about Issaquah? Anybody?
I would say
What do you
the
value?
unique location with access to jobs in the city and the great outdoors.
Okay.
I mean, for me as a father of young kids, I like that have all the parks and everything else here, the activities that are available, the schools, and 15 minutes to the ballpark to go watch a Mariners game and 30 minutes to go to the skiing. Can't get that anywhere else.
I would say the same thing. An intersection of high-tech, high industry, if you will, and then low-tech recreational walking around in the woods. You know, there's just a good mix of some Amish, access to fishing, access to professional baseball. Well, we might not be professional baseball. Careful.
So you said it's an intersection of kind of nature activities and
An intersection of
nature, culture,
And high-tech, he said.
yeah, high-tech business.
I like that high-tech and low-tech.
I value Old Town because
do you value it with the E or without the E?
without please, next thing we're calling ourselves hip. Old Town, because it's Old Town is very important to me and what I value because it is legitimately old compared to other communities. It is real because it is a pre-car town. And we have managed to keep the intersection pedestrian nature with the library and the businesses there. And so other towns around this area are trying to create it, you know, add water. And boom, we've got an actual town. So to me, that really is the heart. And the hatcheries there, it's just critical.
Okay, can I include the hatchery on here?
Sure. And that's all within 5 minutes walk of each other.
Okay, anything else valued?
Go ahead.
Just quickly, ability for citizens to be involved. Be involved and make a difference.
Taking off a necklace to that, I get the sense that people here are really committed to preserving the natural resources, the whole natural setting. So it's starring the whole salmon habitat and creeks.
You have people committed to preservation. Do you want to add something else?
Preservation of our great natural resource. Diversity is better than resource, probably.
Resources in our town, not tell people how to go into them.
Yeah, that's right. Resource is something we use, right?
Okay, before we move on to the next question, is there anything else we want to?
Mine is less of a physical attribute, that there seems to be a real sense of community pride that seems to span most of the citizens that I've encountered.
It's really good. Anything else? Okay.
We were also mentioning this latest iteration of Star Trek, too.
Are you talking about what it was mentioned on the?
Yeah, one of the characters, his mother worked at Issaquah Middle
Right.
School.
Yeah, no, I saw that clip. That was really funny.
Oh, that's good.
And they actually pronounced it pretty well too, which isn't always the case when we're on national television.
Especially on robocalls.
Okay, so the next question. What aspirations do you have for Issaquah in the next 15 to 20 years? So by aspirations, we're not asking what do you think Issaquah is going to look like in 15 or 20 years, but if you got off of your time machine in 15 or 20 years, what do you hope you would see?
I can answer that easily. I would hope that the people 15 to 20 years from now personally value the same things that we just listed. That means that they are still recognizable, even though the growth will have taken place.
So basically, see that list.
Yeah.
And hopefully they all
Yeah.
feel the same
Yeah.
way.
As
I think my aspiration is that the community at large feels like they have a voice in what we'll look like in the next 10 to 15 years, or the next 15 to 20 years, that the voice will be heard and responded to.
So would you say the community will continue to have a voice?
Yes.
and be heard. Have a voice, but nobody's listening. Have a voice, but nobody's listening.
Did you say something?
No.
I would say the ability to preserve and project our identity and build upon our identity and project that into the future. Identify, preserve, a lot of adjectives.
Identify and preserve.
Our identity.
Okay, so I'm going to follow up with that. When you say our identity, is there particular things that come to mind?
Well, like I say, see the first list again. I think our identity is that. It's those values. And so how do we build on those values? So, again, I don't think it's a physical thing. So many things inform it, from the people to the physical attributes. So I think values. I would prefer back to values.
Okay.
On a physical note, I'd like to see kind of a expansion of our activities that we have available in the city. Like I came to advocate for a pool with many groups here. I don't think the pool that we have is very good. And, it'd be nice, instead of building more ballparks and soccer fields and everything else, we build one exceptional aquatic facility for the kids as well. A lot of us are
You said the
traveling.
pool, and what was the second one?
instead of building more, baseball and soccer, and build an exceptional aquatics facility.
Okay.
I guess I have another aspiration that centers around the architecture and urban design manual, and to see that really establishes a signature for Issaquah, that it reflects what the citizenry wants, but develops a sense of place, a better sense of place, a more consistent sense of place.
Taking off on that one. Smart growth that preserves our distinctive small-town character.
Can I give you a long one?
I don't know.
So Central Issaquah is a safe, clean, and vibrant place for people to live, work, play, and learn.
We had safe, clean,
And vibrant.
and vibrant.
Place for people to live, work, play, and learn.
Okay, so now I do want to kind of narrow these down to just 3 to 5, because the next question, we're going to try to focus on just kind of the key components of this.
Christopher, I think a couple of those are actually, we may have, out of all of those, I think we may have certainly 5, but we've certainly, I think we've got 3 already.
Okay? And you would summarize those?
What I said, what Kevin said, what Mel said, what Richard said, what Bob,
Now, you can't just point to that again.
Well, I think it's already there. I think you've got your 3.
Okay.
I would say that the design standard thing is significant. In my opinion, that's significant enough to be a standalone.
Okay, so we'll include the architecture and design manual.
I think we're saying keep it green and keep it clean around here, right?
And vibrant.
Vibrant, yes. A vibrant, green, and clean.
I think the last one was
Yeah.
well said.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, I'm really glad that Mel started with the word safe. I was going to bring that up, but we have on our street 35 houses, and we've had 9 criminal episodes in the last couple of years, and it has changed the environment on our street. And that, people don't talk about that when they talk about saving the trees and keeping the forest, the hillsides and everything, all of which are absolutely critical. But if people don't feel safe to go out and walk their dogs after dark, we're dead.
Okay, so we've got the design manual. We have basically Mel's final statement here that encompasses quite a bit. So I think a third one is more having to do with, the community engagement and involvement. Is that?
Yeah, and maintaining the values and identity.
Authenticity.
And the fact that, we mentioned, I don't remember now, I'm sorry, who mentioned this, but that we still have, the citizens still have a voice. Was it 15 to 20 years from now? Yeah, that to me is absolutely almost as important as safety as a fundamental aspect. But people can't, if they're not cynical 15 to 20 years from now about how they're governed, that will be a huge accomplishment considering the growth that's going to happen between now and then.
I agree.
Okay, I think that's good. And like I said, I can summarize that, I think, pretty well. So just kind of keep those in mind as we move on to the next questions. And the next question is, why are these important? Why are these aspirations, these things that you focused on, community involvement, the design manual, keeping it a safe and vibrant place, why are those important to you?
Those are the building blocks that are going to carry us through to the future. You know, as Commissioner Harrison said, you know, this place is going to grow tremendously, and we have to hand this community to a lot of new people that are coming from a lot of different places. And so we need tools and building blocks to do that.
And Kevin, I would suggest that people, why is it important? I think it's important that people, businesses and residents come to Issaquah for the same reason 15, 20 years that they're coming now.
And when you roll it all together, it's
That would be a
really,
huge accomplishment.
you could think of it as quality of life,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, these are really quality issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, those are the reasons that make us unique. You know,
Yep,
we're
yep.
not Kirkland, we're not Bellevue, we're Issaquah.
So essentially, as we continue to accommodate more growth, more residents, more businesses, we want to ensure that we're maintaining the quality of life and also maintaining what is unique. Is that what I heard?
On that, and the whole point of those three aspirations are focused at that.
Yeah, the civic participation, I think, is a big part of it.
Can I ask a question of my fellow commissioners here, since this is just an open discussion kind of thing? I've had 49 changes of address in 73 years, and I don't remember that I've ever lived in, and I was a reporter for a long time in that, it's, you know, covering government at all kinds of levels, but I don't think I've ever lived in a place that I'm aware of that had the level of citizen participation and demonstrable results is Issaquah. I mean, I kind of have thought about that for a long time.
That's what I've
I just
seen,
want to know if that's,
Maybe it's partly a measure of magical size, too. Not too small, not too enormous, not metro. People feel like they're engaged
between
and can make a
Downhill
difference.
and Microsoft. I mean,
Yeah,
high
yeah,
tech.
yeah.
Kevin?
I agree. I agree completely. It's approachable, and it's the kind of place you're compelled to contribute to in this really interesting way.
And I've lived in a much older town than this. I lived in San Juan Capistrano down in Southern California, and its old town was, you know, a couple buildings left over and a mission, and that was about it.
Yeah.
I've lived in a number of small towns myself, and I think the public participation was more predicated on the issues that were being dealt with than the long term. You know, I mean, so, and I guess I'm not sure. My sense is that we lost some of our participation in some of our meetings because people didn't think they were being heard, nothing was changing. I think that's changed. I think it's changed, but it's slow. That's a hard road to hoe, to get people to accept the fact that they're having a direct impact on, and coming to these meetings that sometimes aren't the most thrilling. I would admit to that too, but that they come and they're disciplined and they make comments and we change.
And to your point, Richard, I would say, why is that important to you? I mean, I frequently point to how the Central Issaquah Plan came about. I mean, when it came about, and people looking forward at that long ago to how Issaquah was going to handle the growth that was coming, how the city went about doing that, which, you know, if those of us who didn't participate in it know how embracing that thing was. And now we've just had a moratorium on development to address the concerns of the citizens. And it's you know, that's the kind of thing that that I point to, and people kind of go, yeah, that's right, I hadn't thought about that. But it's demonstrable.
I will add, even though I'm not really supposed to add stuff as facilitator, but I will say, hopefully, we're taking this community engagement and involvement to a whole nother level now. You know, after seeing it kind of wane a bit. And like I said, I think what we're doing, this surge of gathering as much community input as we can over the next month and a half, I think is a good indication of things to come as far as trying to amp up the engagement.
And you know,
That's great.
Christopher, the last thing on this, when I see what's going on in other large communities adjacent to us in terms of public participation seems to be shaking fists and blocking hallways and things like that. And I understand that the fact that we're dealing with essentially the same issues of growth and things like that, and doing it in a respectful nature in this day and age, to me, is very important. And unique, not unique, but too rare.
Pretty unique. I'd say, I'd suggest.
Okay, so just a couple things that I've added based on that. They said that this, as you mentioned, this is one of the most involved communities that you've ever lived in. We want to continue to make sure that people are heard. And then also, as you mentioned just now, the respectful participation, I think, is important to capture as well.
I've got one more, if you don't mind. The work part in Issaquah is important because I think that it's important because we need to spend less time working to the west and more time playing to the east.
Less work, more play?
Less work, more play, exactly. But, you know, if we don't have to get in cars and buses and head to Bellevue and Seattle to work, rather work in Issaquah and then more time out east.
That's another in retirement. I find myself leaving this lesson. In restaurants, and whatever, realize, geez, for a long time, I used to go.
Wow, that's good.
It's all right here. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question, and I don't think you'll have any trouble answering this. What are the challenges we face in reaching those aspirations? The challenges.
Maintaining credibility, keeping up the battle. I mean, the bottom line is, I think that the only way we're going to secure confidence with the public is to be able to maintain the reality that they have access and can make changes and help make decisions.
I would say growing responsibly, right, as a city. If we have unchecked growth, then we're going to end up with less participation, less people that move here having access to anything.
I agree. I was waiting for somebody to talk about the elephant in the room.
Into your neck.
And I think that, I mean, that's very succinct, and I agree with it. But I think part of one of the challenges is being able to say no and have it be legally sustainable.
And you think that's under growing responsibly or separate?
No, I think it's Bob's. I think it's just almost a comma to Bob's point. It's not separate. It's just part of growing responsibly. To me, is being able to say, I'm sorry, that doesn't fit the code, and it's not relevant here, and I'll come back if you want to, but we're not going to allow that. And having it be sustainable in court. And that kind of thing, to me, when that happens, reinforces the citizens' belief that the local government is working. They may not agree with all of the decisions, but that's the kind of thing that people are afraid they're not going to see in the future. We're just here to rubber stamp.
Challenge to our whole area here is affordability. for different professions, ages of life. Mobility, when we're going to get light rail here, I'll be 91 when that's scheduled to come through, so maybe we could speed that up just a little.
You think you'll be 91?
There you go.
You've been dead for 8
I'll be 91.
Optimism.
And regional traffic.
I think there's an issue with some portion of the community doesn't want to see any growth at all. And so there's a conflict between what's happening and what the role of, for instance, the Development Commission is to try to facilitate that growth in a responsible, meaningful way. And other people that are saying, you can be responsible all you want. We don't want it. We don't want it. We don't want it here.
So would you say the conflict between growth versus no growth?
Yeah. And the challenge is going to be affordability and growth, and controlling growth, because if you control growth, you limit the supply, increases the demand, increases the prices. You have to be right there in the middle.
And it seems to me it's almost so fundamental that maybe it shouldn't even be on here, but the challenges, I think, are going to be keeping, we've talked about affordability, but the challenge for the city is going to be taking the available revenues and matching them to priorities. And by available revenues, I'm talking about everything from federal down to real estate tax and levies and things like that. Because if those continue in the region the way they seem to be going, then fixed income and people that are retired, that are on, made really good plans, are going to change their opinion about living here.
So I heard two things there. One is revenues. The challenge is matching the revenues to the priorities, but then a whole nother one of just sources of revenue.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yep. How do you spend most efficiently what you're getting, and where does it come from?
I think another challenge is a growing distrust of people in authority. And I don't know how to say that any other way. For instance, we have a meeting and the traffic engineer stands up and says, here's what the count is, and somebody from the public will say, well, I don't believe that, I don't agree with that, or we'll look at a classification of a stream. Somebody will say, well, I don't believe that, so there's a willingness in some portions of the community to disregard what certified experts are saying or recommending. Or
I think that's Court TV's fault. Everyone's got an expert they pay to come say what they want to say.
Anybody will say anything?
For $1, yeah.
Okay, anything else as far as challenges before we move on to the last question?
Can I throw out something that would be controversial? Misguided notion that light rail will solve our transit problems.
Yeah, it could.
Can I ask you a question on that, Christopher?
Sure.
I think it actually came up in one of our meetings a couple of years ago. And I know I've talked as a private citizen, I've asked this of some of our elected officials, or one of our elected officials, but is there any thought at this point about where the terminal is going to be? And I think it even came up, frankly, with the consultant
I thought it was
who said it should be.
I thought it was Pickering,
Yeah.
over by Costco.
Yeah, is there any?
I think discussions may be happening at a really high level.
Well, as I remember, that somebody said Redmond, for example, has already said, we got it, we bought the land, it's done. This is where it's going to
Yeah,
be.
we haven't gotten that far, no.
And it's, okay.
Yeah, the consultants that came in here to give us the design manual, they had 2 ideas of where it could go. In fact, they said it was supposed to have 2 hubs.
One was in the Highlands.
One was in the Highlands, one was by Pickering, and then and also the transit was also, the bus transit terminal was supposed to be like
On that
a...
night?
You mean Cranbrook and yeah. But I wouldn't go with there.
That was the only discussion I heard.
Well,
All right, we're getting a little sidetracked.
Yeah.
Pardon the pun. Okay, so the final question,
Just don't railroad us to the
what changes are needed to reach those aspirations?
Well, obviously making the Development Commission a paid position.
Both going to say it at the same time.
They told me I'm supposed to write everything down, but I'm not writing it down.
Way off the record. You know, I think the thing that we did with Crandall Ramble when I first came on board here was just great. We were bringing in experts. Big change might be continue to be aware of best practices, lessons learned when this has been faced before. We're not the first community facing growth, right? A lot of the principles of smart growth, urban design that came out of that Crandall Ramble thing, I think was really great. I don't know how to spread the word about that, but it'd be great if we could, you know, take a kind of educational function maybe in some way.
And I same subject, but I would say that the city has to do a better job of communicating with all of its constituencies, even to the point of pushing the information out to them. If they not just relying on them to go to the website, but the elected officials going out, participating more in local events, meetings, whatever. Communications is going to be more critical as we face as the challenges grow. Communications is going to grow. The need for effective communications can go right with it. And if it's not there, then we're going to be in trouble for a lot of different reasons.
So I've been to a number of community meetings in the Issaquah Highlands at that Blakely Hall that we have up there, where the city comes in with traffic engineers and talks about traffic. Or I think even with our design manuals, there should be like a presentation done on what that means to a community like that in the Highlands, down to the city, and then a couple other places. So a roadshow again.
And let me just say one thing on that that's I've mentioned before, not here, but we will reach nirvana. I will have reached nirvana on this subject when I can go on the city website and click, and within a couple of clicks find the city budget. When I can look in a couple of clicks and find the crime record in my neighborhood. Right now, and I've asked people a lot more literate than I am, and it's not as easy as it should be.
You said budget, and what was the other thing that you mentioned? Crime
Well,
stats?
crime rates, just
Or just you mean findability on the website, right? Yeah.
development projects projected. Where is this going to go in? I mean, we're still in this thing with the 300-foot notification. You know that you get a notice if you're within 300 foot of the development. That's prehistoric as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we ought to be able to push it out to people.
Yeah, so there's a
within a
piece that I
mile.
wanted to kind of capture, make sure I'm getting it. So, and it has to do with pushing information out. Let me make sure I'm getting this right. Basically, the city, what you appreciate and what something that should change, that the city should go to the people rather than sitting up here waiting for them.
I think communications in and out has to be at the same pace as the challenge. So if traffic remains the challenge, citizens have to be able to access the latest information, definition, whatever, and the city should not rely on people just to do that. There should be a concomitant push effort. So it's just basically that communications needs to be a priority.
And Christopher, I agree with what you wrote there about city going to the people.
Oh, yeah, I do too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a good example.
Communication too, and I don't see the word, well, I guess you did write education. That's good. I think it's about educating. Why is what the city is doing good? And why are we taking these measures? You know, so I really just want to emphasize education. I think once you have education, it empowers people to share the vision and build with momentum to a common goal. We're all going to have our differences, but if we have some common ground, which is our identity, but how do we educate them on where we're headed? I'm getting a little long-winded here. You know, I was on one of these next door websites, and somebody was complaining about Issaquah and the growth, and they said, we should be like Redmond. What if we were like Redmond? Have you been to Redmond lately? Have you seen what they've done there? And it was all I could do to get on and say, as a matter of fact, you know, we're trying, you know, and so that education's important. I know it's in its infancy, and we're really not going to see the impacts of this for a while here, but I think educating people on the ground floor puts them at ease and reestablishes confidence.
I think that's a good. Yeah, because it's kind of a cycle, right? The more information the public has, the more comfortable they are.
They talk about it with each other.
Being involved.
Yeah, and we're not just pulling out of the air, there are principles, right, that have been, best practices that have been used. So we go out and explain to them, why smaller blocks, why a grid? Well, we could talk about that. You know, probably most people have no idea why you would want to chop up central Issaquah into a grid, right? But there are principles behind it, and that could be explained.
All right, before I close up, any last?
Okay, I got one more again.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. Convince Sound Transit to change from light rail to bus rapid transit for Issaquah. Right there. I think I bet 90%.
absolutely agree.
I bet 90% of the people in Issaquah don't realize that you won't be able to take a train from Issaquah to Seattle. You would take a train to Bellevue, switch to another train to go to Seattle.
So is Convince Sound Transit
to replace light rail with bus rapid transit. I'd rather that they go in right now and start working on taking the center of I-90, turn it into a bus rapid transit line, and just start running buses.
I think that train's off the
Wait
station.
25 years for a train to Bellevue.
I think that train's off the station.
That's a good pun.
All right, no more puns. Okay, so in conclusion, the City of Issaquah would like to thank you all for participating and providing your input and opinions. And on behalf of the City of Issaquah, I would like to thank you all for even more than that. The commitment you show here all the time that we appreciate more than you know. Your voices have been heard and will be closely analyzed to create a vision for Issaquah that represents the entire community. In order for to help the city understand the range of participants in the meetings in the box, we have the demographic survey that I handed out, and then also the sign-in sheet. And then again, I'll just remind you one more time about the survey that you can take online as well. And that concludes our strategic plan input session.
We beat the time you thought.
45 minutes, yeah? So,
All right, thank you.
So,
Thank
Mel,
you.
Is meeting adjourned?
Yeah.
Meeting is adjourned.
All right, thank you.
Is this